Hello again and welcome to another of my fretworking or scroll sawing videos. This time I'm going to be making a giraffe bracket. Now anybody who's watched my other videos will know I'm a big fan of the old fretworking days, particularly of the Hobbies company and the Handicraft company. And if you look back through my videos you'll find I have done a history of both companies, although to be fair I haven't finished it yet. I'll get round to it one day. Anyway, let's get back to the story in hand. I'm going to have a go at making this giraffe bracket here. Now this is a bracket from 1925. It was designed by the Handicraft company and their design number is 5245. Now I didn't have the original plan as before. What I've done, I've had a little photograph in the Handicrafts annual and I've put that particular photograph onto Photoshop and then carefully drawn it all out. It's quite a lot of work actually, it takes quite a long time, but I quite enjoy doing it. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle and I built it up as best I can, as near as I could get it. I'm not very good at drawing a giraffe's head and unfortunately the picture wasn't very good, but I've had a go at it and it might be passable. Now obviously not having the design, I didn't have any of the other bits that go for it, so I've designed those as well. This is my supplementary design page and on here you'll see I've created a shelf, two shelf brackets and a little frame for a mirror or a picture underneath and a decorative piece to go above the shelf. So you know these will fit around here. I don't know about you, but when I do fretwork I do have a difficulty cutting out a block drawing that is something that's in one colour, like the old Hobbies and Handicrafts are often in either green or black and you had to cut around it, and I find it's much easier if you've got a line to follow. So I always create my plans in a block pattern, then when I've finished using something like Photoshop, it doesn't have to be Photoshop by the way, there's lots of other ones you can use and there's loads of free ones that do the job just as well. I remove the colour and put a line around the outside instead because I find it's much easier following this line than cutting round a design, but that's just me, other people might find the opposite. Anyway, that's enough rabbiting that. Now I've got to choose some wood to cut this from, so what I thought I'm going to do, as usual, I should cut two copies. There will be a white wood one and a dark wood one, and it's always pays to cut two because the back one can be treated as a sacrificial copy because you do get some cut out of the back when you're sawing, and if you put one at the back anyway it protects the top one and you get a better cut. Also it means the saw doesn't rip through the woods quite as fast. I have mentioned this in my other videos so I won't go into great detail. Anyway, what I've got a piece of mahogany, or mahogany look like I should say. It's not necessarily mahogany. I'll call it mahogany, but it's actually some old window frames that I planed down and I've glued together. There's about 4 pieces I think there. This is an offcut from the pattern I made in an earlier video where I did a butterfly bracket, and this is the bit I kept off the end, and I think our giraffe will fit nicely on there, look. And then I thought I might use a bit of this plywood for the back copy, or the whitewood one. Now you've got to be careful with plywood because it does have faults and things. These sheets here I've got, look, but I got these out of a skip. I was out cycling one day and we went past this sort of transport depot and there was a skip outside and it was absolutely chock-a-block with bits of plywood, smaller than this and larger, and I couldn't resist it. So fortunately I had a saddlebag on my bike, so I filled my saddlebag up with as much as I could get in there and also filled the wife's up, so we were quite heavily laden with this plywood, and because it's ideal for fretworks, it's good quality birch plywood. Anyway, the following day I found out who this company was, and it was a transport company, and I phoned them up and I said, look, you know, I noticed you got some plywood in there, if it's going to be scrap would you mind if I got some? And they said, no, help yourself, you know, we're only going to burn it. I couldn't believe it. And anyway, I got in my little Kangoo van and I drove up there and I filled the van up to the roof with as much as I could get, and there was all sorts in there. And when I was chatting to the people, it turned out that it was actually from the Morgan car factory at Malvern, and it was their offcuts. And this company had the contract to take away all the rubbish apparently, all this timber, and this is the wood they use in the Morgan cars. They glue several sheets together and they use it for dashboards and things. And so this is actually part of Morgan cars what I'm using here. Now unfortunately a lot of these pieces, they got faults on, as you can see there's knots and things on it, so you've got to be careful. And also down here, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, there's a line there. It's obviously a join in the wood when they made it in the factory. So you've got to be particular with it and cut it out carefully. It's always a good idea to give the timber, whether you're using plywood or any other wood, give it a light sanding first, because it saves a lot of hassle later. You've got to sand it when you've finished, but if you can do the donkey work beforehand, it makes it much easier and it's better on the table, it moves across. So what I do, I find one of the best ways is to use one of these, look. Now, if you haven't got one of these, I urge you to get one. It's a random orbital sander. Now, for many years, I never had one of these, and I was on this woodworking forum at the time, and people kept on about random orbital sanders, and for donkey's years, I'd never had one. I didn't even know what they were, to be honest, and I thought, well, what the heck are they? So I asked a question in there. I said, why do I need a random orbital sander? And the answer came back, well, it's not a question of whether you need one, it's how on earth have you managed without one? And anyway, I went and bought one. It wasn't this one, I bought a cheaper one. You don't have, this is a good quality one, but you can get cheap ones for about £40, which will do the job. And they are absolutely brilliant, and they're ideal for this job in hand. And I'll just show you what I mean. Now, if you've got a piece like that, look, you can see it's all rippled and marked. I'm not going to use this, but I'm just going to demonstrate, and I'll just show you what happens when you give it a good sanding. Let's just give it a go. Let's do it. Just go like this. You see now, you can see straight away, look how that's gone all nice and white. It's lovely and smooth. This is still rough. Now, if you haven't got a random orbital sander, don't worry, don't despair. You don't have to buy one. Use one of these, just an ordinary sandpaper rock. This is what I use sometimes. But just give it a light sanding before you do it. It will make a hell of a difference, I find. And it cleans the wood up. And it's better to do it now before you start than afterwards. So that's one little tip, is always sand your work first. Another thing to watch out for when you're using plywood is things like this. You see this bunny shape they put in here? That's where there's been a knot or something, and they cut it out and they've stuck this little shape in to cover it. Sometimes they're circular. Sometimes they're imperceptible, but obviously you don't want it in your fretwork, but you can cut round it. I don't know what it's like on the other side. Actually, that's not a bad piece. I might sand that up and use that up, actually. We'll give it a sanding and see what it's like. Well, I've sanded down the plywood, ready to start, but I've got a bit of a dilemma, because, to be honest, I don't know which one to use. This one's nice and creamy. This one is probably the better quality plywood, and it's slightly thicker than this one. But I don't like the fact that it's a bit sort of boring, the colour. It's not nice and clear and bright like this one. So what I've decided to do, I'm going to have a go at cutting the 3 out. So I'm going to join the 3 together and cut 3 copies out in one go. It doesn't matter. The plywood's only offcuts anyway, and it's dirt cheap. It's only throwaway stuff. So I'm not losing anything. But I do like that nice white wood. I'm going to put that one in the middle because that's my favourite one. And I'll have that one on the back. So even with all 3 together, look, it's only going to be about well, about half an inch, which is about 12.5mm, isn't it, if you're not in imperial, and I should be able to cut that okay. It'll make it a bit more difficult. The first thing to do is to get the pattern on the wood. I'm going to stick the pattern on the mahogany. I know some people use all sorts of fancy methods. You can use a spray adhesive on the back, and I've tried that, but it sometimes leaves a sticky residue. You can put, some people put masking tape on first, and then they stick the pattern on the masking tape and peel it off. I've tried that. I found the easiest and simplest way is, as I've mentioned before, is just to use one of those cheap pound shop glue sticks and stick it on, and then afterwards sand it off, or just get a little drop of water on a sponge or something and dampen it, and it will peel off. I found that's the best way. It's certainly the cheapest way, and if you're a scrimper like me, that's the way you're going to go. Obviously, when you're doing something that's delicate like this, you need to make sure you put it on the wood in the best possible way for the grain. Now, on this particular wood, the grain's going that way, and as you can see, there's these narrow, thin stalks that are more likely to break off, so you want the grain going the way of the stalk, not the other way, otherwise it'll snap off like a carrot, won't it? These are the glue pens I'm talking about. You get about 4 for £1. They're cheap enough. All I do is just spread it over the timber within my pencil line here. I know This is very basic stuff, but there are people, you know, it's surprising there's people, obviously who are beginners, who don't know how to do this. And if you know, if you've already seen all this, obviously you can skip past it. But a lot of people do ask that question in the forums, as how do you get the pattern on the paper? Well, you know, this is it. If you watch, this is my, I'm not saying this is the right way, mind. Other people got a totally different way of doing it, and some people think I'm mad doing it this way, but I've been doing this for years. This is the old-fashioned way, and it seems to work. Try and do it as quick as you can before the paper gets creased. Get another piece of paper on top, like this, and go over it and flatten it down. You don't want too much glue, but you don't want too little either. If you have too little and the paper starts flapping up, you'll have the devil's own job cutting it. It's got to be glued down properly, fully. There you go, look. See, that's not too bad, is it? Okay, well, I've cut the wood out, or the 3 pieces of wood out to size, roughly to size. You don't have to be accurate, they can be different as long as they're approximate, then you don't waste any wood. The next thing I've got to do is to fit the 3 pieces together nicely so they don't move while you're cutting. Now, there's plenty of ways of doing this. You can use double-sided sellotape. Some cases I do use a bit of that, but in this case I don't need to. You can hold them together with sellotape around the edges like this. You just put a bit of tape around. As long as the edges are squared together, just pop some around like that all the way around. That will hold it together. And again, I don't need to do that on this, because what I'm going to do with this pattern, because it's so delicate, I shall cut all the delicate parts, the inside parts out first, and I'll do this last of all. This piece here is particularly delicate, as you can see, because it's sticking up on its own. There's nothing to support it, and the same up here, and these here are delicate, and so they'll be the last I'll cut. So I'll have to cut the internals out first. So what that means is I can put some nails, some tacks all around the outside. That'll hold it together while I do the internal cutting. Then when I start cutting the outside, what I can do, as the tacks are cut away and the thing starts to come apart, I shall use some of this sellotape and sellotape the edges together to hold it together while I'm finishing off. That's the way I normally do it, and it seems to work okay. So now this is a handy tool if you haven't got one. It's called a push pin. It's very useful for putting pins and things in. It saves you the bother of trying to hold it and then clenching your fingers when you miss. What it is, it's just a little a brass tube here, and inside there's a little metal rod which is magnetised, and all you do, you get your tack, your nail, in this case a panel pin, just drop it inside there. The little magnet holds it in place, and then when you get on your work, you just offer it up to the work like that and just press it. You can press the thing right in, but in this case I've just got it to hold, and then you can just simply use your hammer like that to put the nail through. Now when you're doing this, you're going to obviously have some bits coming through at the bottom, so you've got to be careful with that. Either make sure the nails are a little bit shorter so they don't stick right through, or nail off. What I do, I've just got a little anvil here, or you can use a lump of metal or anything, and just pop that on like that, and then simply tap the end of the nail over like that. And make sure it's smooth, because otherwise it will drag on your table and possibly damage it and scratch it. So that's one in. And all you got to do now is just go round doing this. Got another one in there. Let's see, I'll put one up there. You just got to make sure that it's held around the outside so that you can cut the inside without it all coming out of synchronisation, so to speak. If you're doing this close to the pattern, be careful, because it might, you know, your pins might actually split the work, especially if it's hardwood like mahogany or oak and it's near the edge. Putting the tack in might split it. A good tip: if you're trying to put a nail or a tack in something and you're worried about it splitting the wood, it's because you've got a sharp point on the end. If you get a pair of cutters and just cut that point off like that, or if you just held it on something and tap it and blunt the point, it will not split the wood. The reason is that the sharp point splits the fibres open and splits the wood, whereas a blunt point breaks the fibres and pushes its way through. So when I'm nailing things, I always do that. I cut the ends off or blunt them with a hammer or whatever. Right, now when it comes to drilling the holes in the wood, there's various methods you can use. This is the old-fashioned method. This is the way we used to have to do it when I was a young lad, and we didn't have any electric drills or anything. In fact, we didn't have anything. This was what we used. And it's very simple. Hobbies used to make and sell these. They came in their kits, and all you do basically, you just pop it on the timber and move this up and down like that. It's a very old-fashioned way of doing things, but it does the job, except you get it stuck in the wood and can't get it out. So that is one way of doing it if you've got one of those. Probably the best way is to use an electric drill if you've got one. It's a bit over the top, but you can do the job fairly quickly with that, obviously. Before you do any drilling, it's always a good idea to put something behind it, like a bit of old kitchen cabinet or something like that. Not only is it stops drilling too many holes in your bench, although my bench is riddled with holes, so I don't practice what I preach, obviously, but also it means you don't get so much cut out at the back, you get a neater hole at the other end. So you can you know, put it on there. Now, for the larger areas like this, you can use a large drill like this and just go through like that. Job done, hopefully. Yeah, it's gone. See, it's nice and clean on the other side because I've got this board here. If you haven't got an electric drill, it's perfectly acceptable to use one of these. I imagine these are freely available now. Nobody wants them now, and this is a very old one. I've had this for many, many years, and it does the job fine. It's the same as the electric drill, except you're doing it by hand, basically. You'll notice in there, nothing to do with fretwork this, but you'll notice I've got a countersink bit in there, and I find that's very handy. I leave that on the bench all the time, and when I'm doing a bit of a job and I'm drilling a hole with the electric drill, it's much easier to just grab this and go like that and countersink a hole than it is to fiddle about changing the bit in the drill. So that's why I always keep that on the bench, but it's okay for that. You can also use, by the way, the little Dremels, the little mini tools. They're not very powerful, but you can do the drilling with those. Some of the holes are very, very tiny, because they go in little narrow places where you can't use a large drill, and what you need is a very, very small drill, down to sort of like 1 mil or something like that, very tiny. So the best way of doing that is to use one of these. This is called a pin chuck. It's basically just a little mini chuck on the end there, and then what you can do, you can, if you want, use it by hand, just spin it like that, but that's quite hard work on thicker wood like this. But the joy of them is you can use it in your electric drill. Look, you just take your normal bit out. I mean, you could put the little drill in the chuck, but it makes it a bit unwieldy and awkward. Whereas you pop that in there, look, and it's much better. And then you can drill the tiny holes this way. Okay. And I know I shouldn't be saying all this, because there are people out there who think, well, why is he telling us all this? You already have. As I explained, there are people who may not have seen it in another video. So I just, just show what you actually do. But that's the way I do it anyway. Right, I've drilled all the holes now, and I use mostly that larger bit for the main ones where there's plenty of room, but for the very tiny ones like down in here I had to use this very, very small one very carefully. That one's a little more on the veining cut down there, so you need a very small drill for that. Once you've drilled all the holes, it's a good idea to get your sandpaper block and just go over the back gently like that to remove the slight bit of cutout from the drill bit, because it will make it much easier when you're popping the blade through this side. So it's always a good idea to do that. Right, when it comes to the little extras like the shelf brackets and the frame, I've decided rather than use the offcut from the main piece of mahogany, I should use another piece that's a bit thinner, because I think that'll be a bit thick for a shelf, what I'm using at the moment, because it is about, if you look at the edge where I've cut it, it's about 5/16 of an inch, which is probably about, what's that, about, in metric it's about 7 or 8 mil, I suppose. I'm not very good at metric. We've got all the preliminaries done, so when I come back I'll start doing some sawing. ukworkshop.co.uk is a good place to visit if you're interested in fretwork or scroll sawing, or in fact any other aspect of woodworking. It contains over 21,000 members, many of whom are very knowledgeable about all subjects within woodworking and are happy to answer any questions you might have. It's well worth a visit. It's free to join, so please have a look in and see what you think.